Our next storyteller is Arthuretta Holmes Martin. Arthuretta Martin was told as a child that she talked too much. Once she grew up and realized the gift of gab was actually an asset, she blossomed and perfected her craft and now connects with audiences, young and old, through stories. And as a human and social rights activist, she has shared the power of story through historical and personal narrative, folktales and fables, and motivational speeches and songs for decades. A TEDx Salon alum and a distinguished Toastmaster, her audiences range from academic institutions, nonprofits, corporations, and governmental organizations. You can learn more about her through ArthurettaSpeaks.com, but please stay with us now and hear Arthuretta present.
Thank you for that very gracious introduction. Wow, I love the first two tellers, and I see a thread about to start in telling. My story today is about an experience that I had. An experience, and now I'm going to use that word quest, an experience about a very notable author. His name is John Jacob Niles, and I studied classical voice with him. But unlike other classical instructors, John Jacob Niles had this way of writing songs that seemed like I knew him. John Jacob Niles came from Kentucky, and there was no way I knew him because I grew up in Philadelphia by way of South North Carolina. But his music had this way of entwining the experiences of African Americans. You see, storytelling, even when it's in song, gives us the opportunity for us to experience life, both things that happened and things that plausibly could happen. As you heard in my introduction, I like to tell stories that raise the consciousness of the listener on subjects that need to be heard. That's the way we memorialize, we learn, and hopefully we correct as human beings our behavior. Anyway, that's the intent. John Jacob Niles knew the importance of stories. He knew so well that he traveled the entire South collecting stories from the indigenous Appalachian people, from African Americans, and from First Nation people. Many of these stories, he didn't give those people too much credit. Some he did in his autobiography, but most of them, at best, he gave them a footnote. Some of these songs were like spirituals. One of them you may have heard, Sweet Little Jesus Boy, or during the holidays, I Wander as I Wander. Yes, those are John Jacob Niles' songs. But the one that really caught my attention was Last from the Low Country. As I said, I grew up in Philadelphia by way of South and North Carolina, and there is low country in both places. I had to do some research on this Lass of the Low Country because her song, her story just seemed like there was more to this thing. So I researched John Jacob Niles, I read his autobiography, and he barely talked about where he got this song from. And then I decided to research the words, Lass and Low Country. Well, all of us know about Low Country, Beaufort, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. I have an affinity with that area. I also found out that there is Low Country in Emerald Isle, North Carolina. Well, come to find out, most of the stories that John Jacob Niles collected was from North Carolina, Cherokee Nation. Lass was another word that I researched, and lass has a whole history. You see, it comes from Ireland and it comes from Scotland, and it's used to describe a young girl, but sometimes it's used to describe a young girl with not the best of reputation. Also, I found deep in the bowels of Google, where people rarely go down to the fourth or fifth definition of a word. That last meant girl of mixed race. And I said, aha, there's something here that we need to know. This was during the 1700s, 1800s, that last had a whole different meaning. So what did I do? I meditated and I thought and I meditated. And then the story emerged in my soul. The Lass from the Low Country is the story of hundreds, if not thousands, of young women that cover centuries. She had many names. Her name was Alma, Native American. Her name was Flora. It was B, Sally, Beth May, Anola. Lass was even Beth's story. But this time we're going to talk about Alma, because Alma was my great, great niece. Alma was a beautiful child who grew to be a beautiful young woman. She was like a bulb about to bloom. Her name means water, as she flowed through life like the creeks that stretched to the ocean. We lived in low country, my people. It could have been Emerald Isle. It could have been Brunswick, North Carolina. It even could have been Charleston, South Carolina, but it was low country still. But in all of low country, there are creeks, and the creeks sort of stretch out like fingers from your palm. My Alma, her eyes glistened like stars on a clear night. Her hair was long and black, and it flowed like the mane on a stallion. Her skin was smooth as butter, taken freshly from the churn. By the time one thing that people would find out about Alma, they would find out that Alma had a smile. It was the most remarkable thing about Alma. It went down to the depth of her soul because it revealed her innocence and her curiosity. It happened somewhere between childhood and womanhood that she mastered the ability of that smile. My great, great niece's mother was Celia. Celia had been enslaved, and she was the consequences of her master's desires and her mother Nelia's inability to say no. That placed Celia in a category that, let's just say, we call her Lass. It was all Celia could do to keep the eyes of the menfolk in the clan, both young and old, from trying to get her daughter's eye. Yeah, sometimes they'd come around and say, Alma. And Celia would say, mind your business. And then Alma would look at them young men and she'd give them that smile and she'd say, Alma, bring yourself on over here. And then one time she saw a young man trying to bring some flowers to Alma, and Alma heard her mama give that young man a word or two. Young man, don't you have somewhere to be? Celia had a job on her hands, and it's one she enjoyed, but one that kept her on edge. Alma loved to dance through the wildflowers on the hill. When Celia was cleaning for the white folks' house up on the big hill, sometimes when she was picking crops for the evening meal, or sometimes when she was gathering water with the other women, Anna would be out in the fields, just dancing around like a butterfly, bouncing from one flower to the other, like she was whispering to them, catch me if you can. One day, as Alma was sitting enjoying the fresh breeze across the hill, she noticed this young man riding on a horse towards her. He was different. He had on leather boots and he had this hat, and his blonde hair just touched his shoulders. But when the wind blew, the hair would sort of blow away. That caught her attention. Up until that time, she had not seen a white man. Celia had done her best to protect Alma. Alma stood up when she saw him. She thought to herself, why is he coming over here to this clan? When she stood up, he saw her. She waved at him. He tipped his hat and he kept on going by. That night, when Alma and Celia were preparing the meal, it was squash. Alma asked her mother, Mama, who was that man that came by on that horse today? Celia stood up from the table, walked over to the wash tub, kept her back to Alma, and said, no one you need to know nothing about and concern yourself about, Alma. She kept her back to Alma. Why? I've never seen anyone who sits on a horse like that. I want to know more about him. Alma didn't look up from cutting up that squash. Celia turned from the wash tub, walked right over to her daughter, crossed her arms, and said, no, you do not. Alma knew she'd better leave that thing alone. She didn't question her mama no more. And Alma looked out the window of their small framed home with that curiosity. You know that curiosity. The next day, she saw him. She waved at him. He nodded again. The third day she waved, she smiled. That revealed her innocence and her curiosity. This time, he stopped. He got down from his horse and he walked to her. He asked her what her name was. He didn't tell her his name. He left, got on his horse. Alma didn't tell her mom about these occasional visits. As the days and weeks passed, the encounters grew more and more and longer. Alma knew that if her mother saw them, she would not approve of what was going on. So each time she saw this young man, she moved further and further down the hill where the wildflowers live, that so Celia would not see them as she worked in the field. One day, as Celia was working, she looked up for her Alma. She couldn't see her. She hollered out for Alma, Alma, Alma. No answer. She shouted, Alma. Not a word. Celia gathered the people from the clan and they all came together and they walked along the creek where the wildflowers grew. It took them an hour before they found Alma. Her body was still. Celia screamed that wrenching scream that only a mother that lost her only child could scream. Oh, sorrow, oh, sorrow. The next day they buried Alma. They buried her on the side of the hill where she loved to play. And the wildflowers sighed. No one knew Alma fell in love with that man that rode on the horse in a way she had never seen before. God knew. I want to believe God knew. Celia was no good for much after that. She not so long after that, passed away, and we buried her next to her beautiful Alma about 1 month later. John Jacob Niles recorded the mourning song, I Want to Believe, of a people who had no power over those of high degree. And I wrote this story to keep the memory of all those young women alive who may have had similar endings. Let this be a warning to them to be careful to whom you give your smile. Be careful who you give your heart and your love. And may the story's melody speak for itself. So what I've done in closing is to take John Jacob's Niles song and package it specifically for young ladies of this time. She was a lass from the low country, and he was a lord of high degree. But she loved him oh so tenderly. Oh, sorrow, sing sorrow. Now she sleeps in the valley where the wildflowers nod. Nobody knows she loved him but herself and God. One day when the snow was on the mead, she passed him by on a milk-white steed, and she spoke to him, oh, nobody paid no heed. Oh, sorrow, sing sorrow. Now he sleeps in the valley where the wildflowers nod. Nobody knows she loved him but herself and God. Now, if you be a lass from the low country, don't love no man of high degree, for he ain't got a heart or no sympathy. Oh, sorrow, sing sorrow. Now he sleeps in the valley where the wildflowers nod. Nobody knows she loved him but herself. Herself. But herself and God and God and God.